Evening, everybody. This is DrHack, and we need to come back to this Trompowsky thing. You know, the one opening that we said if they play it, we can't play our King's Indian defense. Because that will cover then all of the things they can do with d4 and e4, which is like 80% of the openings you'll ever see with the black pieces. That's incredible. We want this. Okay, so let's get into our opponent's head here. Why are they doing this? What's their plan, right? And I think we can see their plan if we just kind of play the computer's number one move. Because this doesn't stop white from playing their main idea. They can do something here that they can't do in any other opening in chess, right? They can capture a knight on move 3 with their bishop. And when we capture this back, I think for our discussion, it doesn't matter which way we go. Something happens to the game where we now have one of these guys and they don't. And so if you start looking at all the black squares, right? Those black squares are just a little bit more vulnerable on white's half of the board unless they start playing moves like this, which cover those squares with pawns. And maybe they even play g3 later to cover those squares with more pawns. And that would be one way that white could take on his lack of bishop and our bishop here. And that works pretty well. I bet they're very proficient at it because this is kind of what they're trying to do in the first place with this opening. Right? So maybe we should not do that. Maybe we shouldn't allow them to have their main idea. That's why this is the chess master's favorite move, and that's why I think it should be our favorite move too. Let's deny him the ability to have his favorite idea. But let's also keep it in our heads what he wanted, because we're going to use that against him. Evil horns, right? Grow out it and grow out. Anyway, so there are 3 moves that he could play. 3 ideas. They're all the same idea. He needs to save the bishop from your knight. I mean, that's kind of pretty obvious, right? I hope. And one of the ways he could do that is by putting a pawn in front of it. Remember, he's not afraid of you taking the bishop. He wants you to do it because he wants to play this game where he's got pawns on black squares. Well, that's a pawn on a black square. He's pretty happy with that, right? And so what we can do here, if we were to waste one more turn, whatever that might be, I believe our opponent's next idea would be to try to get rid of this knight and force it to make a choice. And I think he would do that most likely with this knight, forcing you to choose. Are you going to take the bishop? Are you going to allow this to trade off and leave the bishop where it is? Or are you going to take the knight, right? He's making you choose. And so we shouldn't waste any time at all here. We can play a move that should make our opponents very uncomfortable because we want to remove the pawns from the dark squares. That's one of our main goals. If we do that, then we're going to be happy to take this piece off the board. So a move like c5 becomes very, very cool, right? It can get rid of one of those things. It actually stops the knight from coming here now. Because if we did that, maybe we could take the bishop off the board and just take a free pawn. I don't know. Could work, right? But what we can expect here is we can expect this to have, a nervous breakdown and go get therapy because he's under attack. And so maybe he plays a move like d5. Or maybe he takes the pawn. This one's kind of fun. You guys see right away, right, that we can get the pawn back if we want it. We don't even have to use the knight. We can go check and just take it. So that means that if we wanted to, we could take this bishop off the board because now there's less pawns on the dark squares, right? And then we could go check and take it if we wanted to. The other option is we could do this move, and now we're attacking 2 things with the same move, and we're going to get one of them back no matter what. That's pretty good too, right? So there are lots and lots of ways now to take this on, but now that we've gotten one of the pawns off of the dark squares, I think we're very happy to take this bishop off the board. If we go back to our discussion about how good this knight can be in this game that we had in our King's Indian versus the London system a few videos ago, this knight right now, that's as good as he'll ever be in this game. What's going to happen next is he's either going to get traded off or pushed back, right? And so maybe getting the bishop for him is the best we can do. Well, especially as if we can get the pawn to get off the black square. Okay. Let's look at one more option for white here before we move on. Let's look at what happens if this pawn kind of moves off of the dark squares onto the white squares. And I think that means that we accomplished our objective that we tried to do with the pawn moving to c5, because the pawn, is no longer defending his dark squares. And if you look on his half of the board and just scan for a minute, look for the weak spots. You see the one here, right? It's undefended by anything. And this one, attacked once and defended once. You notice how those are still both on dark squares. And so we have an opportunity to play a move like queen to b6, which attacks both of them. Now I happen to believe that we can do even better than that if we just make this bishop go to a place where it's not defended as well. What if the bishop's now here and we played queen to b6? It's even stronger. Because now white has the opportunity to make monstrous mistakes, right? What happens if he does this? Well, we can make the fork between the bishop and the rook, and they're both undefended, and that would be winning. So now he has to do something to defend this, probably now with the queen. Not bad, huh? So these weak spots here and here are what we're staring at and what we're trying to do to equalize and start our attack off in the game, and I think we have. I think black is now in the lead with development. Okay, so let's go back and let's see maybe a different move with the bishop. What if he goes here? Does that change anything about what we just learned? I want to say it doesn't. This is still the weakest spot on the board. This one's attacked once and defended twice now. Maybe it's not as weak. But I do think that our idea is to remove the things from his side of the board on dark squares is still merit, is still worth something, right? And so we should probably still do that. Because if we manage to do it when he plays a move like this, do we mind if he takes our knight now? Think that one through for a minute. If he takes our knight now, he just moved a pawn that was able to attack dark squares, and then he removed his piece that covered those dark squares. That's not consistent with his ideas, is it? That's going to make our game much easier to play. And remember, if he takes the c-pawn, we can always get it back with a check. So we're not losing anything. We're never giving up this pawn no matter what. And so now I think we're in a great spot, right? So him trading the bishop for the knight now, after kicking our knight back like this, that's not going to work very well. And so then he's off to, what does he do about this situation again? Does he push the pawn past? Does he capture it, right? And I think that puts us into great shape here with black already, giving our opponent headaches early on in this opening. So let's check out white's main move now. We're going to understand this one at a fairly high level if we keep our ideas the same as we did in the other versions of this. And the idea that we're specifically focused on is how do we attack the black squares on his half of the board, right? And I think c5 is still the right idea to start to do that. Because if he trades the pawns off, then we've taken a pawn that's more useful in the center of the board and traded it for a pawn that's less useful, not in the center of the board, yeah? And that's good for us. We would love to see that. If he does something like push past, just like the last one, the weak spots show up here and here, and the queen to b6 move starts to become a headache for white. He can make big mistakes, right? The same one he could make before with the fork between the bishop and the rook. Or he can play a move like queen to c1, which seems to not help his development at all, right? Or the bishop could undevelop back to c1. All of those things, and this is the computer's favorite move, by the way, all of those things seem to give us the impression that maybe we've equalized the game and maybe we're starting to win already. I think so. So maybe white shouldn't be pushing that pawn past again. And then we're looking at moves like this and we're wondering, what do we do with this one? And you have to recall again, come back to this idea that once the pawn moves to f3, we're no longer afraid of these two pieces trading whatsoever. And so if we moved the queen out and gave a check and he blocked with the bishop, we'd be very, very excited and happy to take that off the board, wouldn't we? It's actually even worth a pawn here for us to do that. And if he took with the knight, very similar thoughts, right? We're very happy because this knight is as good as he's going to be for the entire game. we're okay with trading it off the board. We're okay with not trading it off the board. We're okay with anything we want to do with this piece now. And I think that we know enough to be getting on with at this point, as long as we remember, let's attack the dark squares on his half of the board. I sure hope this helps somebody. You guys have a good one. Take care now. Bye.